A Song for Silas by Laurie Wick. Chapter 9. 2.5 miles northwest of town, nestled into the base of a rocky bluff, sat the Nolan farm. It was not a farm handed down from earlier generations of Nolans, but it had been home to Amy for as long as she could remember. Grant's father, as a very young man, had come to Neilsville to work in the logging industry there. Grant was born into this rough existence and even worked for a time in the logging trade. But the work was dangerous, and Grant, with a wife and young daughter, had wanted out. He borrowed money from the bank, which was subsequently owned and operated by his wife's uncle and brother, and bought a small, ill-kept dairy farm not far from town. Grant moved his wife, Maureen, and small daughter, Amy, to the farm when Amy was 3 years old. The barn was large, with more than enough room to house the 19 healthy cows Grant milked. His milk went daily to the Daisy cheese factory at the edge of town, a steady income he'd banked on for years. The farmhouse was small and white, with a high-pitched roof. A small porch led up to the front door that opened into the kitchen. 2 bedrooms and a living room completed the downstairs. Single-cut stairs in the living room went up to the bedroom in the attic. Silas and Amy emerged from the house as a clear morning sun warmed the ground. Silas, in clean blue denim pants and a red plaid shirt, walked beside Amy, whose dress was a soft yellow print. She tied on a matching bonnet as the couple moved across the yard to the barn, where Silas had the wagon and team waiting. Silas watched Amy glance back at the house and broke into her thoughts. "You're worried about your dad being alone. If you're worried about your dad being alone, I could take your list for town." Amy shook her head in rather sad resignation as she answered, "No, Silas. Dad would be upset if he thought I stayed on his account, but thanks for the offer." Amy stopped by the wagon and looked up to meet Silas's eyes. "I suppose you think I'm being rather silly, but he's so helpless in that bed. I would just feel sick if anything more happened." Silas answered as he helped her into the wagon, "On the contrary, I would think something was wrong with you if you could leave without a backward glance. Do you trust Mrs. Brewer to check on your dad?" At Amy's nod, he continued, "Then I think you should leave with a peaceful heart, knowing you've taken care of everything." Amy was thankful for his logic, and when a quarter-mile up the road they stopped at the Brewer's farm, all doubts vanished. "Of course I'll check on your father," Mrs. Brewer assured Amy. "I'll take Sammy with me, and we'll see to his every need. You know I'm always happy to give you a hand. It's important for a woman to go out to town when she can. Lifts the spirits, I always say." Amy smiled at this woman who, along with her husband and sons, had been such a help and encouragement since her father's accident. It was to them she had run when her father had called from the yard in agony. The bone in his leg had actually come through the skin, and his entire body had seemed to lie at an impossible angle. Amy had been unable to move Grant from his crumpled position at the bottom of the ladder. So, upon arriving at the Brewer farm, Mr. Brewer and their oldest son, Dave, raced with Amy back to the house, while Sammy was sent for the doctor. Among the 3 of them, they had moved Grant to his bed and were keeping him warm when the doctor arrived. "Yes, Silas was right," Amy thought as she introduced him to Mrs. Brewer. "I completely trust my father to this woman's capable hands." The prospect of time in town had Amy's mood high as the land leveled out and the houses of the main street came into view. Their first stop was at the bank, where Amy hoped to catch sight of her Uncle Evan. Much to her disappointment, he was out. Amy made a withdrawal, while Silas returned his rented horse and saddle to the livery. When Silas picked her up, Amy asked him to drive the team to the general store. She had her list of household supplies, and Silas had Grant's list for the farm. Amy saw familiar faces everywhere as they made their way past the hat shop, the boarding house, saloons, and numerous lumber dealers. The sight of Amy aboard her own wagon, with a strange bearded man at the reins, brought many stares and a few hesitant waves. Hesitant, that is, until Silas pulled up in front of one of the general stores. "Mrs. Anderson," the owner's wife, who was always on the lookout for new faces and news, nearly ran into them on the boardwalk out front. "Well, Amy dear, you've been such a stranger lately. How is your father? We've missed you on Sundays the last few weeks. We really do hope you'll be out soon. No one can play like you do. I'm afraid you've got us all spoiled." Amy noted with amusement that while all the comments and questions were directed to her, Mrs. Anderson's eyes rarely left Silas Cameron's handsome face. "Well, Amy dear," Mrs. Anderson said, with some reproof in her tone and a raised brow, "aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" A quick glance at Silas told Amy he was as amused as she was by the woman's long-winded speech, but his manners were impeccable as Amy did the honors. "Mrs. Anderson, this is Silas Cameron, a friend of my family's from the Reedsburg area. Silas, this is Mrs. Anderson. She and her husband run the general store and post office." Even as Silas shook the woman's hand and attempted to greet her politely, she began to speak. "Well, how nice to meet a friend of Amy's." No one missed the emphasis she put on friend. "Tell me, Silas, I hope it's all right to call you Silas?" "Certainly. Tell me, Silas, are you looking to settle in this area, possibly planning to make your home here?" "Well, no, ma'am. Actually, I'm here to help at the Nolans while Grant gets back on his feet." "Oh, well." Her voice was filled with disappointment. "I hope you have a nice stay." She looked at Amy with genuine regret in her eyes. Then with a sudden, "Oh, goodness!" Mrs. Anderson's regret was replaced by curious interest. "There's Millie Baker with her new baby. You two go on inside. Ed will see to you." Silas stared after the once again talking woman until he felt Amy's hand on his arm. "Is she always like that?" Amy laughed. "Oh, yes. She's never the same twice. The only thing that stays the same is her ever-present desire to see her daughters marry. I'm afraid you crushed her by telling her you were not going to be living here for the rest of your life." Silas kept his thoughts to himself as he entered the store, but the idea of Mrs. Anderson as a mother-in-law was a bit disconcerting. Once inside, the couple wasted no time selecting the items on their list. In short order, everything was loaded and paid for, and they were on their way to see Bev Randall.